lady garden, private parts, vajayjay, hoo-ha? Let's just come out and say it. It's vulva and vagina, okay? Beating around the bush, if you will, is one of the reasons people are still so uncomfortable talking about their bodies. And this has real-world impacts on health and wellness. So strap in, because we're gonna talk about it. First, we gotta get our words in order though. When most folks talk about female genitals, they often say vagina. But the vagina is very specifically just the canal inside the body. It's internal. The vulva is where most of the fun stuff is. It's all of the female genitalia on the outside of the body. So let's explore. First, we've got the mons pubis, or the fatty tissue on the outside of the body that protects the pelvis. Then we've got the outer lips, the labia majora. These are fleshy and grow pubic hair, and inside those are the inner lips, the labia minora. Both the inner and outer lips are there to protect the parts underneath them, like the urethral opening, where your pee comes out. And under the surface of the labia are two glands that sit either side of the vaginal opening. These are called Bartholin's glands. When someone is aroused, blood flow to the genitals increases, and this can stimulate those glands to produce moisture. It's a mix of water and proteins. This is what's happening when people talk about getting wet. It's natural lubrication that gives anything entering the vagina a bit of a smoother ride. Speaking of the vagina, this is the perfect opportunity to address a big myth, the hymen. For centuries, people thought that vaginas have a seal, that the hymen must be broken when something is inserted. And it's all wrapped up in the social concept of virginity, which is a topic for another time. But essentially, the hymen is just a thin flap of skin inside the vaginal opening. For most people, the hymen has at least one hole in it, usually more. And it doesn't actually break, it gets stretched. By physical exercise, by using a tampon, or by penetrative sex. But that doesn't always hurt. There's not always blood. And most hazy pop culture ideas of what the hymen is are actually pretty far from the truth. Everyone's hymen is different, and some people don't even have one at all. The world really loves to focus on just the vagina when it comes to sex, anatomy, and pleasure. But it's not even usually the main source of pleasure for those with vaginas, because that, my friends, is the clitoris.
What's fascinating for me is the way the clitoris, the full internal structure of the clitoris, has come and gone from anatomy textbooks. It was there in the middle of the 19th century, and then it went away. And then it came back, and then it went away again. And I was just reading a sex manual written in 1940 that absolutely included the clitoris as important to sexual pleasure, but it talked about it as just this little nub.
And it is so much more than that. The clit is a sensory organ filled with blood vessels and an estimated 8,000 nerve endings, about double the number found in the penis. And it's a heck of a lot bigger than just that little nub we see on the outside. That's the glands clitoris, which is connected to a much larger internal structure with clitoral bulbs extending down on either side of the urethral and vaginal openings. And finally, there's the pair of crura. They're kind of like the legs of the clitoris. And when you look at it this way, you can see that all genitalia are pretty similar. Both the penis and the clitoris are made of erectile tissue that swells when aroused, and they originate from the same organ structure during fetal development. But despite these similarities, the clitoris is still pretty poorly understood, especially when compared to the penis.
The biggest gap is that penises go first, and then vulvas come a decade or two later. So for example, full imaging of the internal structures of the penis happened in the 80s and 90s. It happened for the clitoris in the middle 2000s. The first anatomical illustration, to my knowledge, of the full internal structure of the clitoris was in the middle of the 19th century. So we knew that anatomy was there, but to give it the attention it deserved, to get the funding to be able to do the research, just took a couple decades extra.
Since 1947, only a handful of anatomical papers have been published specifically on the internal structure of the clitoris. In fact, many major medical textbooks still omit at least some internal clitoral anatomy, and still more contain inaccurate depictions of the nerve endings that surround this really important organ. And this lack of formal knowledge impacts those whose sexual anatomy may need medical attention. Like when your vulva, or just pelvic area in general, is being operated on, you want your doctor to know where everything is. That lack of up-to-date education and discussion spills over into schools, households, and even relationships.
What talking about sex does is empower people to make choices for themselves. And what ends up happening when we don't talk about sex is that people do not have the information they need. They do not feel empowered to make choices that are right for them. And they're gonna end up making choices that are right for somebody else. And that's where boundaries start to get crossed. So communicating about sex is 100% essential in making the world a better place. Like if we want the next generation to have a better experience growing into their sexual selves than we did, the way to make that happen is by talking about it.
Research has shown that many people don't even know the correct terms for many parts of their own bodies. Lots of folks don't know that there's a separate opening for urine, that we don't actually pee out of our vaginas. And one study found a majority of its participants felt uncomfortable using the words vagina and vulva. But if we can't say the word out loud, then how can we express a problem we may be having to a doctor or to a partner? Feeling embarrassed about even just saying the words magnifies any shame someone might have about their vagina or their vulva in the first place. And there can be a lot of insecurity about the way this stuff looks because of how female genitalia is usually shown in the media, especially in porn.
Where people get really confused around sexual anatomy of vulvas is in thinking there is a way they are supposed to look that is correct. In fact, vulvas just look incredibly different from each other in the shape and size and color of the labia, external and internal, in the shape, size, position of the clitoris and the urethra and the vagina, and all of the variations in how our parts are organized are normal and healthy. The only sickness that a vulva can have is if you're experiencing pain or infection, in which case absolutely seek medical attention.
So making friends with your body, getting to know where everything is, what it looks and feels like, how it works, this is all essential to our sexual and reproductive health. Talking about our bodies without fear or shame and feeling empowered by calling things what they are, advocating for resources and research into the unique complexity of female sexual anatomy, all of this is so important. I mean, I'm sure you've heard of the G-spot, and most scientists these days don't actually think it exists. So for closing the orgasm gap, for improving care for those recovering from physical trauma to this area, and for catching and treating things like STIs and vulvovaginal cancers as early as possible, for your health, happiness, confidence, and sex life, grab a hand mirror. Say hi. You won't regret it. Thank you all so much for watching Seeker's Body Language. If you have another topic like this you want us to cover in this series, then let us know in the comments. And check out this video here for more info. I'll see you next time.